These are the people in charge of our wealth. Part one, because part two will come next. So I'm reading this article, Demographics, Redistribution, and Optimal Inflation by James Bullard, who used to be, I think he still might be, the head of the president of the St. Louis Fed. Carlos Garriga and Christopher Waller. And I've followed, I've read these guys on occasion very much, and I like Bullard and these other guys. I like their writings for sure. I'm not anti these guys. But the premise that let me just tell you, it's interesting. So here's their premise: when older cohorts have more influence on redistributive policy, the economy has a relatively low steady state level of capital and a relatively low steady state level of inflation. All right. What that simply means is when the older people run things, you're going to have low inflation and high interest rates, according to Bullard et al. The opposite happens when young cohorts run things who have more control over policy. These results suggest so basically when younger people are in control, you're going to have high inflation and low interest rates, all right? Because the younger people are trying to build assets, and the low interest rates allow them for wealth accumulation through leverage, essentially, be able to buy a home for cheaper than what higher interest rates would allow. And higher interest rates or higher inflation leads to higher growth of wages, which also higher growth of wages relative to low inflation rate, relative to low interest rate, means that the inflation is pecking away at the debt. This is economic ideas that I hear on occasion here, like, oh, I want high inflation because I'd destroy my debt. Okay. But anyway, the point being, so let me just draw this out for you here. So we have two groups of people that are competing for resources, essentially. We have the old and we have the young. All right. So we have these two groups of people. The old, they like high interest rates and low inflation. Why? Because the old's on a fixed income. And high interest rates give them more bang for their bucks on their safe money in the bank. And low inflation means it's a level that their fixed income can keep up with it. That's just a factor. When you're old, you want high interest and low inflation. No, I don't think anyone would debate that. The young want high inflation and low interest. Two literally competing entities here. Because high inflation means higher wage growth, low interest rates means higher wage growth more than dwarfs the low interest rate that they're paying for their home and the debt they're accumulating. Because the young people don't have any assets; they're accumulating assets, so they want to be able to accumulate those assets with low cost of borrowing. Interesting. Who's been in charge? Well, the older people have been in charge in terms of our representatives and whatnot. I mean, look at freaking Sniffy Joe, Nancy Pelosi, all these Mitch McConnell. They're all freaking. What the hell? Should be age limits. That's a fact. But who is actually what policy has kind of been proven? Well, it hasn't been high inflation, low interest rate, has it? It's been low inflation, low interest rates. Isn't that very interesting? So one would say, look, they're doing great right here. Low inflation, low interest rates. All right, well, that wouldn't be what the Fed would predict, right? So how we got there? Well, so they're basically trying to split the difference on competing entities. We're going to give you low interest rates, but we're also going to give you low inflation. Well, low interest rates are gone relative to the last 20 years, and low inflation is gone relative to the last 20 years too. So now we have high inflation and high interest rates relative to the last 20 years. Isn't that interesting? But the Fed would think they have control more so than they do. So check this out. The results suggest that aging population structures, such as those in Japan, may continue to be observed low interest rates and even deflation. All right, so basically what the argument here is the Fed saying, look, man, as people age, and I completely agree with this, they want high interest and low inflation, and they actually want even deflation, and they're going to vote accordingly. And they're going to, so the Fed would argue, so we have an aging population in the United States here as well, so they're going to want high interest rates and low inflation, even deflation. The interesting thing that the Fed doesn't say here, again, they're not speaking on behalf of the Fed per se, but still, is that debt is inherently deflationary. I cannot stress this enough. Debt, so older people is deflationary as well. Older people are deflationary. Why? Because they don't consume as much. They just don't. 70% of the GDP is based on PCE, personal consumption expenditures. Older people just don't contribute that much to expending. They just don't. Anecdotal evidence on top of anecdotal evidence on top of anecdotal evidence, i.e. you can see people, and then you can say your own grandma, your own parents, but you can see it all over the time, all over the place. And then at some point it comes empirical where you can actually observe it. You say, dude, people as they get old, they just don't spend as much. Ironically, older people don't borrow as much either. So if debt is deflationary, then how come older people is deflationary even though they don't borrow as much? Because they're not borrowing so much because they're freaking literally what they're doing is they're spending down their assets and they're not spending very high. So their spending is dropping like a freaking brick in water, but they're not taking on debt to consume. They're just not. Now, younger people, your old buddy Josh and whatnot, and I'm 52, I'm getting older by the day. Younger people, though, on the other hand, we consume a lot, and because we're growing families, dude. That's as a growing family, you consume. There's no other way around that. But what happens is with younger people, they're pulling forward consumption by debt. We don't have the cash flow in which to buy this cup of coffee, so we're going to borrow from the future. We are literally consuming today, borrowed from future consumption, if that makes sense. So while we're accumulating assets, building things with debt, we're borrowing today in order to consume today. The consumption is now behind us, but the borrowing still has to be paid back. So debt is deflationary. I cannot stress this enough. Debt is not inflationary. It's inflationary for the temporary time because it does give a boost of stimulus to GDP growth, personal consumption expenditures. I'm buying this today. We've had this, I don't know, for 5 years. So we bought that 5 years ago. We don't need to buy it in the future. Thus, our consumption is lessened in the future. Now, you might say, yeah, but you'll consume other things, kind of like the broken window theory. Yes, you will consume other things. Again, though, as you're accumulating the wealth, your ability to consume those other things will be lessened because you have to pay back the debt. Hope that makes sense. And at some point, you get older enough where you no longer consume other things. This is why marketing, they never appease the people over 45 or 50, something like that. The primal generation of marketing is like 18 to 45 because those people can still be influenced by propaganda. The older you get, the less likely you'll be influenced because you're just not changing your habits. Oh, that makes sense. All right, so now what happens? But these guys, they say, hey, look, man, Japan, we have observed like older cohorts, they want high interest and low inflation. Younger cohorts want low interest and high inflation. However, results suggest that an aging population, by what we observed, such as those in Japan, may contribute to observed low rates of inflation or even deflation. Check this out. And it will just keep going. In each case, roughly speaking, economies with a higher share of younger population are associated with higher inflation, whereas economies with a higher share of older population are associated with lower inflation, again, as they observed in Japan and soon to be in the United States. What's the observation here? Right here. This is so freaking stupid, dude. I cannot believe this. So basically they're saying, look, inflation demographics in U.S. 1960 to 2010. All right, so the demographics, i.e. the younger people right here in the dotted line, oh my goodness, they're growing a lot more younger people from 60 to 80. Look at that. And inflation, ironically, happened to jump at the same time. Thus, the Federal Reserve is conflating, is that the right word? Younger people with high inflation because this observed scenario right here, that we had a growing younger people and inflation was growing. Thus, that means younger people leads to higher inflation. On the other hand, they're seeing the demographic shift starting in 1990, less younger people and less inflation. So these are the people in charge of our money, dude. I cannot stress this enough. This observation right here is leading them to a correlation. They're saying, look, correlation equals causation. Young people is inflationary, old people is deflationary because of this right here. Okay, and then they're going to come, look, but Japan did the same thing, Josh. Inflation demographics, younger people, older people. Younger people, high inflation, older people, low inflation. It's the same time frame. So the Federal Reserve Board, James Bullard, Barriga, and Waller, what could possibly have caused this inflation other than the demographics? I'm just curious. Could there be something else that's causing that inflation other than demographics? What could possibly it be? I'm shocked here. Because if we can find another reason for the cause of inflation, that destroys your theory right there. And your theory, I'm going to show you here, is freaking insanity because you think you can steer the economy because these insane theories. Again, so we have a hypothesis, So we basically have observation, we have a hypothesis, we test it, and then we come up with a theory. So we're beyond the hypothesis now. The theory is older people are deflationary, younger people are inflationary, inherently because demographics drives this stuff. Oh, what could it possibly be in the 60s? Oh, Vietnam War. War is everywhere and always inflationary. Don't believe me? Civil War, World War I, World War II. Always, every single war is inflationary. War is inflationary, without question. All right, so we had Vietnam War, which is going through the roof. This is off the back of Korean War. All right, so war is inflationary. We introduced Medicare. Medicare is a huge government expansion. Huge government expansion, inherently inflationary. And I talk about in my book here, Relax and Retire, which you can get, and you should, about the cost of Medicare and how the government picked up the bill. Well, the government picks up the bill by what? Well, by taxation and borrowing. That's what they do. All right, what else? What else caused? Oh, we had a huge drought, worldwide drought in the early 70s that caused the price of food to go up. Oh, and we had the oil OPEC crisis, and we ran out of natural gas. So we had a Murphy's Law of all these contingencies all kind of fell into the late 60s, early 70s, causing massive inflation that we hadn't seen since the end of the post-war era of World War I and World War II. I hadn't seen it. You can attribute that to the demographics. I find that to be silly, dude. That's correlation does not equal causation. It's just dumb. It's dumb to say because of the 60s and 70s, the demographics were aging, i.e. getting, basically the younger population was growing, the baby boom that led to inflation. It's freaking stupid. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true, but there's other causes of the inflation of the 60s and 70s. And here's a problem that bothers me more than anything. Because they've created this hypothesis and then a theory, now what's going to happen here is I'm going to show you a couple things here. Inflation dictates the real return of money and thus portfolio choices of each generation. Okay, I don't have any problem with that. Consequently, workers like inflation when they're young but dislike it when they're old. Thus, if a single generation could choose the inflation rate at each point in their life, they would choose high inflation when they're young and low inflation when they're old. Clearly, the generations exist side by side, though, and they compete with each other as to what the policymakers should do. Because, again, the policymakers are going to look at this and say, oh, man, a growing population, younger population, that's going to be inflationary. Declining in age population could be deflationary. So we're going to make policy standards based on that. So check this out. So we got all these stupid econometric stuff that no one, it just is dumb. I hate that crap. Freaking Paul Samuelson, you freaking clown. Remember, Paul Samuelson who came up with this, who started the whole thing of economics is just like math. We want to be looked at as a hard science. We're just as smart as those guys. So they create all this, it's just nonsense. And everybody else has since followed suit. And Paul Samuelson, of course, in his great econometrics, could not predict the demise of the Soviet Union. In fact, in 1989, said the Soviet Union would overtake the U.S. in economic output. Oh, what happened in 1989? Yeah. All right, so here's the cockiness of these people in charge. The optimal interest rate determined by intergenerational discount rate can be implemented by shifting resources across cohorts at a given period. This ensures that the young cohort saves the right amount, implementing the fully efficient solution. Are you hearing what these guys are saying? These guys are literally saying the optimal interest rate determined by the intergenerational discount rate can be implemented. We can do this by turning a knob on interest rates. And what they say is, look, we did it, Josh. We did it. High inflation, high interest rates, low inflation, low interest rates. We met at the middle, so everybody's happy. It's insanity, man. It's insanity. You didn't meet at the middle. You didn't do that. You didn't meet at the middle. Basically, what you did is you spent to your freaking heart's content, propping up the basically 0.1% of the wealthy and destroying middle-class savers and retiree savers. Because we had low interest rates. But they also had low inflation. They had low interest rates. Low interest rates destroyed a lot of these people's savings. Now, if some of them invested in the markets, they made out like bank as long as they got out in time to lock in some gains. But the fact that the Federal Reserve thinks they can just twist a couple knobs, it's kind of like the climate change people. It's insanity. Again, my faith in these guys and the whole economic out is dropping like a freaking brick in water. My faith in God is growing. It's like a seesaw there. I think I might have said this in my last one that I had to delete. Because it's like a seesaw. Faith in God, faith in man. So when you have faith in man, Your faith in God goes down. When you have faith in God, your faith in man goes down. My faith in God is rising. My faith in man is shrinking. It's almost like the Bible talks about that. It's like harder for a rich man to get to heaven than a camel to get through the eye of a needle. It's almost like the Bible knew a couple things, didn't it? Anyway, so this is the people who are in control of our wealth, the Federal Reserve. And I'm going to do part 2 of this, which is going to even discuss it. So this isn't discussing. This is just mind-bogglingly idiotic in terms of how much these people value their own self-worth. Oh my goodness, we're so smart. Our econometrics shows us that we can turn this knob here and that will give us the optimal rate of inflation that both retirees and young people can live on. It's going to be great. We're not guinea pigs, man. But yet they act like we are. All right, don't forget to subscribe. Get my new book. It's out on Amazon. Bestseller. And don't forget my retirement planning course is on sale. Just use the promo code TAX. It's in the doobly-doo down there, how to find it. All right, see you. Love to hear your thoughts.